Hi, you're watching theAnalysis-news, and I'm your host, Talia Baroncelli. Today I'll be joined by Dr. Ofer Cassif, who is a member of Israeli parliament. We'll be speaking about Israel's genocidal war in the Gaza Strip and its invasion of Lebanon, as well as the killing of Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar. If you'd like to support the show, you can go to our website, theAnalysis.news, hit the donate button at the top right corner of the screen, and get onto our mailing list. That way you always get all of our content sent straight to your inbox. You can like and subscribe to the show on Apple or Spotify or other podcast streaming services, as well as on YouTube. See you in a bit with Ofer Cassif. Very excited to be joined by member of Knesset, Ofer Cassif. He is a member of the Hadash-Ta'al party, which is a left-wing coalition comprised of both Jewish and Arab Israeli citizens. And Hadash is also a movement founded along the lines of communism, inspired by communism. So the party or the coalition also calls for equality for all people living in Israel and Palestine and has called for an end to the occupation. So thank you so much for joining us again today, Ofer.
My pleasure. Thank you.
So Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has confirmed the death of Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar. I wonder how you see this playing out. Do you see this as contributing more to a rallying around the flag, around Netanyahu supporting the government's genocidal endeavors, the genocidal war in Gaza, and enabling further settlements in the West Bank and additional invasions and incursions into Lebanon?
Well, I'm afraid yes. Netanyahu has been doing for many years, and especially since October 7, everything possible in order to preserve his own coalition and government. He's not interested in anything else but his own good. All the slogans he's been using as if he cared about the well-being and the very basic lives of anyone, Israelis and let alone Palestinians. Or those were used by Netanyahu simply as excuses, but he cares only about his own good. He doesn't care about the security of Israel and the Israelis. He doesn't care about the lives of the Israeli hostages and soldiers. And he definitely doesn't care about the lives and well-being of the Palestinians, the Lebanese, and others. So he is going to use the Sinwar assassination as yet another excuse or another proof, as it were, to his own power, and which is a sham. So I'm afraid that because in the last year, and especially in the last few months, we've been witnessing, and I said that in great pain, with great pain and horror, that Israeli society, not all of it, of course, but too many segments and millions of people in Israel celebrate death and bloodshed of Palestinians and Lebanese primarily, but also they don't care. So it seems many of them, of course, again, not all of the people, but too many don't care even for the lives of the Israeli hostages, and Netanyahu is manipulating it. So is he going to continue with this manipulation given the death of Sinwar?
It did seem like a few months ago that approval ratings for Netanyahu had reached an all-time low, that, people were so upset that the hostages are still being held in Gaza that there's no end to this war. I mean, of course, a distinction can be made between those people who call for the hostages to be brought home and those people who want both the hostages to be brought home, as well as an end to the suffering and the bombardment of the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. I think those are probably maybe two segments of society. But aside from that, you had people like Gantz and even Yoav Gallant saying that the strategy isn't really going anywhere and that there needs to be a different strategy, and perhaps even calling for Netanyahu's resignation. Now that eyes have been shifted and attention has been shifted to Lebanon, how do you think that is changing?
Well, first of all, you're totally right in the diagnosis you made. The Israeli society is very, very polarized. It is polarized between those who support the continuation of the genocide in Gaza, and we have to mention also the ethnic cleansing in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, and the massacre in Lebanon, and even a call for, so to speak, retaliation versus Iran. So this, and on the other hand, on the other side, there are also thousands, even millions of Israelis, Jews and Arabs, who oppose the government, who oppose the genocide, who call for total end of the attacks, the continuation of the genocidal attacks on Gaza, and for a deal to release the Israeli hostages. So this polarization plays at the moment into the hands of Netanyahu, because he manipulates, as I said before, the situation, and he manipulates the situation in Lebanon as well. He's been using, not to say abusing, the situation in Lebanon in order to get power and support from those segments which I mentioned that are not against the government and against the genocide, but seek more fire and more blood. And unfortunately, apart from us, Hadash-Ta'al in the parliament, and of course out of the parliament in the streets, there are many other organizations, civil rights organizations, anti-occupation movements, etc. Apart from us, there is no opposition. I mean, you mentioned Gantz. I can add Lapid, and even Yair Golan, the new elect chairperson of the so-called Democrats, quote unquote, which is basically the Labour and Meretz parties. Even them, they support, at least to some extent, the ongoing violence of Israel against its neighbors, especially against the Palestinians. So they play into the hands of Netanyahu as well. In one phrase that I tweeted in last November, exactly 1 year ago, I tweeted a phrase which I'm afraid proved to be right on a daily basis. That the Israeli government, and unfortunately great parts of the so-called opposition too, hate the Palestinians more than they love the Israelis. And because of that, they incline to continue the violence and bloodshed, even if it comes at the expense of, as I said before, Israeli soldiers and hostages. So Lebanon, in that sense, going back to your question, Lebanon, in that sense, is no more than another instrument in the hands of Netanyahu to gain support and power. He's a cynical psychopath who doesn't care about anything but his own good, and unfortunately, is surrounded by even more fanatic psychopaths who dream, which is actually a nightmare, about the greater Israel, what they see as greater Israel, and even acting, not only imagining, not only to reoccupy Gaza and the South Lebanon, but also to settle there. And this is a crazy situation, which unfortunately is done under the auspices of the international community, primarily Biden's administration.
Well, you're speaking of settlements, and now we could turn to what's called the Ger Eiland plan. So Ger Eiland is a retired general who contributed to a plan. I think it's also called the General's Plan, that was published in September in a publication formed by an Israeli NGO, which is comprised of, I think, 1,500 Israeli military officers. And correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like this plan wants to essentially eliminate Palestinians from the north of the Gaza Strip to create what they would consider to be a buffer zone, and to then, after ethnically cleansing and killing people in this part of Gaza, to then resettle it with extreme Jewish Israeli settlers. it seems like it's already underway because there's virtually no aid getting into the north of Gaza, even after this, this letter that Blinken and Lloyd Austin, the defense secretary of the U.S., wrote to Netanyahu, which was then leaked, and we haven't really heard any proper analysis or discussion on this paper, but we can leave that aside. Aside from that so-called warning, which probably isn't a warning if it doesn't concretely threaten all arms to Israel, do you think this is already underway in the north?
I'm afraid it is, although the Israeli government denies that. But I'm afraid it is, and I rather call this so-called plan, and I published it, I tweeted, and I posted about it a few weeks ago, and I call it very, bluntly and straightforwardly as the new Wannsee conference, which echoes the Wannsee meeting that was taking place in Germany about 85 years ago, before planning the so-called final solution of the Jewish issue in Europe. And I do compare the so-called general's plan to the Wannsee and of the final solution, when we should rather call this plan not the general's plan, but the general extermination plan, or the official genocide plan. I think that the island and his companions are war criminals that should be tried alongside others, Israelis and Palestinians, by the way. Let's not forget that those who are responsible and took part in the massacre of October 7 are also war criminals that should be tried. But going back to what's going on in North Gaza, this is a clear war crime and crime against humanity, initiated by this creature you mentioned, so it is underway, and I'm afraid that it's going from bad to worse on a daily basis. Unfortunately, I rather call Blinken Mr. Blink Eye, because they do blink eyes, and what are they doing? The gap between the rhetoric, not only now vis-a-vis the general's genocide plan, but throughout the genocide in the last year. On the one hand, there is the rhetoric of Biden's administration and some other governments and figures in the world, especially the so-called democratic West, that speak, not too often either, but sometimes speak against the death toll, against the destruction, against the starvation, and some other stuff, against the violence of settlers in the West Bank, but practically do exactly the opposite. They continue to arm the Israeli genocidal machine. They continue to support practically the Israeli government by vetoing decisions that are brought, or resolutions that are brought to the Security Council of the United Nations, and practicing in the practice in that sense, as normally is, more important and more influential than the rhetoric. And by the way, the only practice, positive practice that Biden's administration and some other governments like the British government, etc., have been doing is to sanction some of the Judeo-Nazi settlers in the West Bank. But those are the riffraffs. They don't touch the real, the real ones that should be punished and tried. So this is, in a sense, they just focus on those who are easier to go against, and they refrain from confronting and tackling the real criminals. So in that sense, we should bear in mind that is exactly what allows the massacre that goes on at the moment in northern Gaza under the title of the general's genocide plan. The blame should be put on the Israeli government and those governments across the globe, especially the United States one, that allow those crimes to go on. The creature you mentioned before, the General Islanders and companions, are criminals too. But let's not forget they are not in the government, neither in the military at the moment. So those who are really responsible are the government and the generals who are still in service, and those who support them.
Well, it almost seems like the U.S. keeps saying that they're trying to constrain Netanyahu's government, but if you cut away that facade, if anything, they're doing the complete opposite, and they're enabling the worst elements of Israeli society and the Israeli government. So it almost seems like they do want the complete destruction of Gaza, of parts of Lebanon, of the West Bank. What sort of agenda are they pursuing? How do you assess that?
Look, unfortunately, the United States, throughout modern history, has always been responsible for the worst massacres and war crimes across the globe. I wouldn't exaggerate if I said that since the end of the Second World War, the United States, different administrations, Democratic or Republicans, doesn't matter, Democrats or Republicans, have been responsible for so many war crimes, and everything is in order to preserve power, to control the world. This is, called poetically, as it were, American imperialism. And it's still on. I'm currently in South America, in the state of Uruguay. The state of Uruguay, like its neighbors in Brazil, in Chile, in Argentina, and everywhere, and more to the north too, Nicaragua, Mexico, and other places, they've been suffering for so many years, especially during the 70s, 80s, but even before and sometimes after, for this North American imperialism that supported practically by arms and by and some other ways the worst military juntas that were responsible for torturing and killing thousands and thousands of innocent people who struggle for liberation and democracy. So that's exactly what the United States has been doing now in the Middle East. It's not something new. What they've done here in South America 50 and 40 years ago, and what they've done later on in Iraq, for instance, and other places, they are doing now in the Middle East. And they want to control the Middle East with Israel by proxy. And Israel is the proxy. So they want to change the regime and the political structure in Lebanon, in Iran for sure, in Syria, everywhere. Now, that is not to say that I sympathize with those regimes. I obviously do not, to say the least. Do not sympathize with the Iranian regime, for instance. But the United States, it's not its role to decide for anyone else which government will be in power. It is up to the people of Iran, of Lebanon, of Syria, etc., to decide. And let alone when the intervention of the United States was never for the benefit of the peoples, was never in favor of democracy, but only in favor of having its own proxies to pursue its own interests, political, economic, etc. And so it's more of the same. And I'm proud to be part of a political camp that has been struggling against the American imperialism and its proxies for about 100 years. And we'll continue to do that because that's for the benefit of all, including, by the way, the Israelis, I must say. My struggle and our struggle is for the benefit of all. When we struggle against the genocide in Gaza and the other crimes that the government of Israel is responsible for, we do it for justice. Justice is universal, and that is to say that it is for Palestinians and Israelis alike. Our struggle is for the peoples, all peoples, and we'll continue that.
In the past, when I interviewed you, you were talking about rights not being a zero-sum game. Of course, there's a segment of the population in Israel that, they might have full access to democratic rights, but if their neighbors or even Arab Israeli citizens within Israel don't have rights, and then Palestinians in the West Bank and in Gaza are being oppressed, then it means that everyone is actually suffering from this collective lack of rights. And there are, many examples of this with, for example, restrictions on the freedom of the press. I mean, there are both Jewish and Arab people in Israel who have been protesting or questioning what's going on in Gaza and who have been silenced. The Al Jazeera office in the West Bank was recently shut down for 45 days, and Al Jazeera has not been allowed to operate from within Israel. I believe they had to shut down their Jerusalem office. So there are numerous examples of this erosion of various freedoms within Israel. But I think what I wanted to ask you about is something you mentioned with regards to imperialism, because a lot of people, when they speak about Israel's relationship with the United States, a lot of people say that it's all AIPAC. It's money being funneled through the Israel lobby that is creating this policy. But would you say it goes beyond that? It's a much larger question of the military-industrial complex, of massive defense contractors who are so reliant on the continuation of these conflicts that it can't just be explained by the Israel lobby. And this also ties into the regional framework we see in the Middle East. I mean, a country like Egypt is in a way also a client state of the United States. They receive an incredible amount of military funding for in exchange for this relationship that they have with the United States. So it can't just be pinpointed on the Israel lobby. It's a much larger issue. Would you say that's the case?
Yes, absolutely. First of all, I must say that to some extent, the accusation that AIPAC or the Jewish pro-Israeli lobby in the United States or anywhere else is more powerful than others, to some extent it amounts to anti-Semitism, as if Jews have more power than others throughout the world, which is obviously nonsense. And it is a kind of a conspiracy theory which I cannot never endorse. So we must be very cautious with such sayings. The real issue is the power of those who are, powerful, given their control of materialist powers, of those who control the economy. This is a class issue. This is not a national issue or an ethnic issue or a religious issue. This is a clear class issue. And if we understand and analyze the situation globally and locally by using the class analysis, then we understand that the real power is the unholy trinity of imperialism and reactionary regimes, especially Arab reactionary regimes, and the Zionist regime. We've been saying that the Communist Party of Israel, before Israel existed as a state, the Communist Party or parties in the Middle East, the Palestinian one, now the Israeli one, and others, we've been always saying, since at least the 20s or 30s of the 20th century, that there is an unholy trinity of those three that I mentioned: imperialism, Zionism, reactionary Arab regimes. And I think it's still the same. You can see that the interests of America now, North American imperialism, Arab reactionary regimes in different places like, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, etc., and Zionism, they are all intertwined in their interests, especially economic and political ones. And that is the thing that drives the ongoing crimes that go on in Gaza and in the region as a whole. And this is how we have to understand that in order, not theoretically or academically speaking, it's not an issue of academical analysis, although it might be also. It is primarily what we should confront and how we should struggle against those crimes and against those reactionary, dangerous, deadly regimes. Once we understand it, then we know who and how we should struggle. I think that's the most important thing. And I go back to what you mentioned, the non-zero-sum game. It is indeed a non-zero-sum game, because in zero-sum game, if there are two sides in confrontation, so once one wins, the other necessarily loses, and vice versa. And that's not the issue here. The issue here is a win-win versus lose-lose situation. Either everybody wins by ending the genocide, ending the war, ending the violence and the bloodshed, and ending the occupation, obviously, liberating the Palestinian people from the oppression and occupation, and at last, that the Palestinian people, will get their independent sovereign Palestinian state besides the state of Israel, which is the core of everything that goes on in the Middle East. And we all heard, by the way, just recently, the foreign affairs minister of Jordan saying, I think it was in an interview at the UN, who said that once the occupation is over, the vast majority, almost 60 Islamic and Arab states, are going to normalize their relations with Israel. That proves what I said before, that it is an interest of Israel as well, not only of the Palestinians. So this is the win-win situation. The only alternative is a lose-lose situation, which means that everybody is going to lose. Everybody is going to drown in rivers of blood and destruction. I'm afraid, and when I say everyone, I mean not only the Palestinians who have been drowned in such rivers of blood and destruction already, but I mean also the Lebanese, the Israelis, the Syrians, the Iranians, even Jordanians, Egyptians, etc. Everybody in the region is going to drown in rivers of blood unless we stop this madness now. And that means stopping the genocide, the other crimes, and immediately moving towards a political solution to the Palestinian issue, which means liberation in the sense that I mentioned before. That's the key. And if the world doesn't understand that, and the world, I mean governments, because the peoples around the globe seem to me to do understand that. Not everybody support that, but many do. I assume that perhaps even the majority of the peoples in the world support the liberation of the Palestinians and a peaceful solution to the ongoing massacre in the Middle East. But the governments, especially of the United States, either do not understand or do not care. They must understand that it is not only just the liberation of the Palestinian people and its independence. It is also the interests, eventually, as opposed to what seems to be the interest. It is the real interest of all the peoples, including of the American ones. Because unless we get there to this peace, everybody's going to pay the price. Perhaps not tomorrow, perhaps not even next year, but sooner or later, everybody is going to pay the price. Just look what's going on now in the Middle East. Because of the ongoing insistence of this criminal fascist government of Israel to continue with the criminal genocide in Gaza and the other crimes in the West Bank, East Jerusalem, Lebanon, etc., there is a serious risk of a regional war that will begin in Israel versus Iran, but will easily spread into the whole region and beyond. It's up to the world to stop it, because eventually the whole world is going to pay for that. I'm afraid we are on the verge of such a catastrophe, because of those cynical, self-interested, minority governments in so many places that I mentioned before, this unholy trinity.
That was part one of my discussion with Ofer Cassif. In part two, we look at the fascistization of Israeli society, as well as Palestinian self-determination. See you next time.